Welcome to Prepper Nation. I'm John. This may say live or it may say that it was live streamed previously. It was as a private video, and then I'm uploading it that way. So Google's not doing you dirty. Welcome to Prepper Nation. Thank y'all for being here. We'll get right into it this morning. I'm gonna start with a question. All right. Don't be afraid to leave a comment one way or the other. Maybe explain why you think it is this or it is this. Is the United States of America going to see itself get involved knee deep, red hot in World War III? I'm talking about potentially 100,000 plus boots on the ground, armor, the whole nine yards. We already have troops on the ground in Ukraine, but not many. They're there for training purposes. They're there for, the purposes of gaining intel, etc. We're there, but we don't have 100,000 plus on the ground in Ukraine, is what I'm trying to say. World War III, will we get fully engulfed in that first, or will we see an economic collapse here in the United States first? Love to know what you think on that, because before I saw a video, and we'll get into that in a second. I'm going to break it down, give credit where it's due. We're going to go over a list of 10 reasons why. But the long and the skinny is, I thought it was going to be World War III. And I said, hey, we're already in it somewhat. We're just not in it, all the way. We're kind of flirting with World War III would be the way to put it. But then I saw a video put out by the Epic Economist. And he actually broke down a list of 15 reasons why we are about to see an economic collapse here in the United States, and, why that's going to happen before we get involved in a world war. And so what I did is I narrowed the list down really to the 10 that really caught my attention and brought some numbers along as well. Coffee this morning, by the way, mean beans, huh? Because these numbers were eye-opening. And when I saw some of these numbers, I said, you know what? He's right. We're about to see a collapse. So you could argue, and I've argued this in the past, we're already kind of sort of, again, flirting with the collapse. We're kind of stumbling, trying to grab onto what we can. But when I say collapse this morning, I'm talking about free fall. Just total free fall. There's no correcting it. I mean, dire straits, if you will. So let's get into the list of the 10, and we'll go through it and everything. Number one, and this one really hits home, because for many of you probably as well, because we know about inflation. We know how things have risen in price since, 5 years ago. Things are more expensive. Can we all agree on that? Can I get an amen on that one, son? The average household income here in the United States has dropped 10% in the last 4 years. So not only have things gotten way more expensive in the last 4 years, the average income per household has dropped 10%. So people are making less money, and they're having to try and stretch it even further. So that was pretty eye-opening for me. Number two, according again to the Epic Economist list, people are borrowing money to pay for everyday expenses. Now, we've talked about this one here on the channel in the past. We've been doing this for decades here in the United States of America. People are living on credit, right? They just don't have any money. And so they're kicking the can down the road. We always talk about, and I'm guilty of this, we always talk about how here in the United States, we don't have a lot of representation in Congress. But I've had time to reflect on this one. And I think we are well represented in Congress. I know, don't get me. That's a hot take, but hear me out. I think we are well represented in Congress, because Congress, they get money and they waste money and they spend money they don't have in the first place, and they borrow money from over here and over here. Like Social Security, for example, totally wiped out. They borrowed all of the money that was set aside that people have paid in for other things. knowing they can never pay this money back. They do this constantly. They're constantly overspending compared to what they actually are bringing in each year, right? Um, we do the same thing here in the United States of America. Rather than people living within their means, I think that it's called keeping up with the Joneses or something like that, right? Instead of living within your means, I'm not saying you directly, I'm saying the average American, right? Is they're just not financially responsible. So, they make X amount of money per month or whatever the case per every 2 weeks maybe. But they're spending more than they actually make, and they're using credit cards to kind of keep up with the lifestyle that they're used to keep up with their neighbors, to keep up with the Joneses. This is a huge problem because it is now coming back to roost here in the United States of America. We'll talk about that in a minute. But how much credit card? Getting to number 3, this is a huge number. Americans owe $1.14 trillion in credit card debt. So our government, they're a much bigger offender. The national debt is much more than that, right? But it seems like the same pattern. We're spending ourselves further and further into debt that we can never pay back. The government, the Congress, they're doing the same thing. You understand? So that's a lot of money. Here's how I look at credit cards, okay? I'm not a fan of them first and foremost. I think if you now, of course, they're good to have, I guess, in an emergency situation, but most people are not using them for emergency situations anymore. Um, the way I look at credit cards, the way I've always approached credit cards is if you have to borrow $1,000, for example, I'm just pulling a number out of the sky, right? You're going to have to pay interest on top of that, of course. How are you gonna pay it back? Because if you were able to pay it back, you wouldn't need to borrow it in the first place. Now, again, there are exceptions to the rule, but by and large, it's just no good. It's a debt cycle that once you get into it, it's really hard to get out. Number 4, this blew my mind because, again, I don't have credit cards. I've got debit cards and things. I've got silver, right? I don't have any gold. I got silver, the poor man's gold. But anyway, the average credit card interest rate right now, the average meaning the average across the board here in the United States, 22.76%, almost 23% interest. Folks, that's really, really high. So something's going on here. Either people are not paying their credit cards off, and the banks are passing that on to the next group that's signing up. They're just raising interest rates, or banks are taking advantage of people that are in a tough spot, and they're just milking them for everything they can get. It could be a combination of the two. I don't really know, but I know that almost 23%, that's really high. I you know when I was younger, I explored credit cards. I think it was around 10 or 12%, which at the time I can remember thinking, man, that's pretty high. 23%. And that's on average. Some of those cards are gonna be higher than that, some a little bit lower depending on your credit score. Number 5, well, that might be it. Banks are trying to collect billions of dollars in debt, on delinquent credit card accounts, charge-offs, as they're called, I think, in the industry. So people are borrowing this money at insane amounts of interest, 23% almost interest levels. They're maxing out credit cards, and then they're just charging it off. They're just saying, I'm not paying it. I don't have the money. Bringing me back to the original point, if you had the money in the first place, you wouldn't need to borrow the money. You know what I'm saying? Number 6, this is an eye opener for those of you that have 401k. If you do, and you've had to do this, maybe you want to drop in the comments. You don't have to. Emergency 401k hardship withdrawals are at a record high. So, in other words, people dipping into their 401k in the case of an emergency and paying a lot of money to do so. They get penalized a lot. They're up 36% since the last presidential election. That right there in itself tells you about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris right there. That's the only receipt that you need. Kamala Harris is running for president. She's got to get at least some of the blame. I know she's not the president, but she's got to get some of the blame because she's had a hand in this economy too. That speaks volumes. Since Trump and Biden, were running for office and Biden got elected, selected, whatever, right? 36% increase in people having to dip into their 401k just to survive. Meaning they're not going to have a retirement by the time this economy is through. Um, number seven, again, this is since the last presidential cycle, basically the last 4 years. The average mortgage payment is up 96%. I don't even know what that looks like, folks. I don't know I should have wrote down the average mortgage payment 4 years ago and then, the current, but 96% is no joke. That's basically doubled since Joe Biden took office. I'm just saying. That's a real staggering, eye-opening number for me. That was one of the ones where I'm like, maybe we are going to see a collapse full blown before we see a world war full blown. Number 8, another staggering number. More than a third of working Americans are working multiple jobs. Let that sink in for a second, okay? We used to be a nation where one income would get the job done, right? Stay-at-home moms were a big thing, homemakers. People laugh at that, but it matters. When you have a homemaker at home to help with the kids, to help with things like that, things aren't dysfunctional. That's a huge rabbit hole. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but families have been dysfunctional and splintered ever since both parents kind of got into the workforce. Now we've reached a point here in the United States where a third of the people that are in the workforce are having to work 2 jobs or more just to survive. Again, just to survive. They're also using, as we've established, credit lines. They're borrowing money they can't pay back. And some of them are working 2 jobs and they still can't afford to pay it back. That's insane to me. This one is loco. All right, this is number 9. The fastest growing demographic in the workforce. What do y'all think it is? What's the age demographic? What do you think the fastest growing demographic is? It's ages 65 and up. You remember 65, 62, or 65. It's time to retire. Woo! Time to retire. Well, not for a lot of Americans. A lot of Americans, they've spent their 401k trying to survive. Now they don't know what to do, so they're entering the workforce. A lot of younger folks, we've heard this in the past, and there's an argument to be made on both sides, okay? I've listened to both sides, and there's some legitimate complaints by the younger generations, if you will. But somebody has to work the jobs, right? Otherwise, there is no economy. And 65 and older count for, listen at this for a second, okay? These, let's drive it home with this. This is a huge number to me. So a quarter of the entire workforce here in the United States is 65 and older. A quarter, 1/4 of our entire workforce is comprised of people who are supposed to be retired, but they can't afford to retire. And they're being hired because employers aren't getting applications from the younger generations, and they have to have bodies in there to do the work. That's insane to me. And finally, number 10, a majority of Americans polled So they did a poll. I think he said the Epic Economist, it's like 5,000 people that they polled. Okay, I think was the sample size, and a majority of them, all of the people that were polled, make six figures plus, anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000 annually. That's just their income. That's not household. That's one worker making $100,000 to $200,000 a year. And a majority of them admitted we're living paycheck to paycheck. Imagine making anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000 a year. Okay, some of those folks are single, some of them are married, their spouse is probably out making money too, and having to live paycheck to paycheck because you can barely afford to survive in this economy. I don't know. It was a real eye-opening video, and I was bored this past weekend, and I caught it. I was watching it on YouTube, and I said, I really need to talk about this because at the rate we are going, our economy is not going to survive much longer. When it comes to World War III, it seems like a lot of posturing, a lot of saber rattling. Everybody's loading up. To me, it's obvious we're going to have a World War III. Um, that became painfully obvious when North Korea sent, thousands of troops to Ukraine. All right, North Korea, not trying to get sidetracked, but they don't fight outside of their region. They're a hermit kingdom for a reason. So World War III is inevitable, but I think that this economic collapse is probably going to happen first. I really do. Here's what I think is going to happen. Here's my prediction. Okay, I think the economy is going to totally crash. People are not going to know what to do as far as money is concerned. And then I think the U.S. military, which is woefully understaffed, is probably going to add a lot more to their enlistment, like their sign-on bonus. It's up to 50,000 right now. They may double it, you know, giving, people that are economically deprived, giving them a handout, saying, hey, come with us. We'll take care of you financially. All you have to do is go into the World War meat grinder, this sort of thing. So I don't know. Let me know what y'all think in the comments if you don't mind. Take care. God bless.